Welcome back to Mid-Level Adventurers, a podcast where non-experts talk about the things they love. I'm Jarrod, and with me for this first series is my co-host, Matt Morris.
Hello everyone, it's Matt Morris.
Dungeons & Dragons is a fantasy role-playing game where players create characters and head off on adventure. A large part of these adventures is typically combat. But what does that really mean? How do they work? And how do you run it as a DM? Well, this week we are going to do our best to answer that. And since I am the resident DM of Mid-Level Adventurers, Matt will be taking the wheel and asking the burning questions. So Matt, where would you like to start?
Well, I'm very excited to be doing the questions this week. This is always a great learning opportunity for me as well.
Yeah, I love it.
So to start us off, we'll do something basic. Please, Jarrod, why don't you tell us, what is a combat encounter?
All right, in simplified terms, a combat encounter is a battle that plays out in the game. It's where the players, as their characters, battle monsters or foes or enemies that the dungeon master controls. That's combat.
All right.
In a more technical sort of term, which I think is what you're really getting at here, a combat encounter is a portion of play during a session where every participant, player, monster, whatever, gets a turn to perform some sort of action. A combat encounter is made up of a number of rounds, which fluctuates depending on the combat encounter. Every participant in that encounter gets a turn in a round. Once everyone has had a turn, a new round begins, and each participant's place in that round is determined by what is called an initiative roll. In game time, a round is about 6 seconds, but in real time, it can take much, much longer. If you have 10 entities in a combat, that round of combat with everybody taking a turn could take 20 minutes in real time.
It's always wild to think of how short it actually is in the game for the characters after you spent an hour trying to, kill some bandits.
And just to clarify, it isn't like it's 6 seconds for each turn. It's 6 seconds in the round. So all of the turns are happening in the same 6-second interval.
Right. It's simultaneous, if you will.
Exactly.
That's an excellent description. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Now that we've got the basics out of the way, let's, jump right in. How do you work combat into a campaign? Mm-hmm. Is it entirely story related? Is it random events? A little bit of both?
Yeah, for me, it's definitely both. It depends on a few factors for me. At lower levels, I feel like random encounters, bandits or like a solo cyclops or something like that, are more of a threat than they are at much higher levels.
Yeah, I'd say.
The idea being that once characters get to a point where those dangers are irrelevant, I tend to focus more on narrative or major threats.
Sure.
Lower levels in my game have more random encounters.
It's sort of the grindy encounters, isn't it? Leveling your characters up a bit, getting the grind out of the way.
Exactly. You want to get your characters up and give them the experience of taking out bandits or anything like that. Because honestly, by the time your characters get to level 7, 8, 9, 10, an ambush of 12 bandits isn't going to be anything to them. They're just going to wipe the floor with the bandits in like 1 or 2 rounds. So it's not even worth doing the encounter or gaining that minuscule amount of XP if you're doing an XP-based game. The more interesting and meaningful combat encounters, I feel, are the ones that happen later or are part of the narrative of your overarching story, where the characters have much more to gain and much more to lose.
Yeah.
So I like to work combat in where it's appropriate, and if I feel something needs to happen that I didn't have planned for, like, well, they decided to go to this place, there's probably going to be something there haunting the grounds. Then yeah, that'll be a random encounter.
Well, speaking of when appropriate, there are probably a lot of opinions on this question here, but what do you think? How much combat should you have? And do you try to determine it like per session or per quest or storyline?
Yeah, this is definitely a hotly debated question in the DM communities. Some groups only really like combat, so they don't care so much about a narrative session. They just want to get in there and grind and kill things and do cool maneuvers, and that's kind of what they care about. So, to them, a session without combat is a bit lackluster. However, other groups can be overwhelmed with too much combat because it just feels like such a slog. I personally like a balance, and I find that most of my groups do as well. If there is a large, like, multiple session combat in a dungeon, or like have to go through the layers and go through all the rooms or stuff like that, I like to balance that out by giving them a chance to either RP during a rest or whatever, or I like to give them a couple of sessions after that big dungeon crawl to kind of cleanse the palate. Like, that's where you do your shopping. That's where you can investigate rumors, have silly little encounters with shopkeepers or bartenders or people in the street or whatever.
Maybe decompress a bit if you've had a lot of combat-heavy nights.
Right, exactly. Just to kind of relax and get all the tension and stress out. That's kind of the real answer, though. It totally depends on the game, the group, the table. I like a good balance. I'm not going to give it a numerical ratio, but whatever feels appropriate. And sometimes, like, honestly, as a DM, I didn't have time to prep tons of combat, so I might make a few interesting role-playing decisions that they have to engage with, just to ease the load off of myself.
Yeah, that's fair. Here's maybe an interesting question. Do you predefine or predetermine certain encounters as combat, or do you sort of create situations where there may be more than one solution, and you let the characters decide whether they're going to fight, flee, or talk?
I think I do both. There are some moments that just need to be combat. You might be able to bluff your way past some guards so you don't have to expend any real resources against them. You can lie, you can trick, you can confuse them, you can create a distraction and ignore that fight. But, like, if you get all the way up to the evil enchantress who's getting ready to cast her spell and awaken all the porcelain dolls in this kingdom, chances are she's not going to be talked out of her plans no matter how high you roll.
Right.
So that obviously needs to be a combat.
Mm-hmm.
However, I have had sessions where I had a planned combat and the players talked their way out of it without throwing a punch.
Oh, that's very cool. When it comes down to fighting, though, how do you determine the type of combat? You know, the number of enemies or the type of enemy, that sort of thing.
Yeah, honestly, you just put in whatever monster you want and you see what happens.
Okay, yeah.
You can use the monsters in the basic rules as a guide, and you can adjust anything. Hit points, armor class, attack, damage. You know, if your adventurers are trekking through a savanna, then yeah, you can use a lion and it makes sense. But if they're trekking through a jungle environment where maybe lions are less likely, you can still use the lion stat block, but reskin it as a jaguar or a leopard.
Oh, very cool.
Or if they're in the mountains, maybe it's a mountain lion or a bobcat or something.
Mm-hmm.
As for how you determine what you're going to put into a combat, it's really about the narrative for me. If you have a character who is a giant hunter because a group of giants destroyed their village, you better throw some giants in that campaign for them.
Mm-hmm.
Not saying it has to be all about the giants, or every session there need to be giants for them.
Right.
But every once in a while you need to let the giant hunter shine, because that's part of their character. That being said, you need to let everybody shine. If you have a necromancer that they are going to go fight against, that's a great place for a cleric or a paladin to shine, because they have all these things against undead.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so you better give her some undead minions, or cultists, or whatever. And if you're going to put a dragon in, because who doesn't want to put a dragon in a game because it's Dungeons and Dragons, you got to have the dragon. They're just as likely to have like a bunch of minions worshiping them or working with them as they are to be totally solo entities. It all depends on that particular dragon. Look at the narrative that you want to tell in your game and look at your characters' backstories. And that'll give you some great ideas. And like, yeah, maybe, oh, my parents were killed by orcs, and by 10th level, orcs aren't so much of a problem anymore for most characters. But maybe that orc has more abilities, and their entire raiding party that they've crafted together now contains not just orcs as foot soldiers, but maybe they brought in some giants and cyclopses, or maybe they've allied themselves with a necromancer, or whatever.
Yeah.
You don't have to stay letter strict to a player's backstory to make it an interesting narrative. You pick elements from it, and you're like, how can I make this worthwhile? How can I weave it into the story that I want to tell as a dungeon master that also my players are going to appreciate? Because it's not just about the story the dungeon master wants to tell. The dungeon master has an idea of like, hey, I'd like to do this kind of a campaign, and then the players are like, okay, and then the players kind of decide the narrative from that point on.
Yeah, that's fair. I like that a lot. I think it helps you probably as a DM figure out what stories you are going to tell, and it certainly should keep the players captivated and motivated to pursue those stories. So that's great.
Yeah, as the DM, you want to challenge your players. You want to build ways for them to really improve. And whatever is going on in your game, using these backstories really allows you to give them arcs where they face their fears, old terrors, and traumas. Because real heroes don't just go out and fight back the gnolls that are raiding the town. They also face their own inner turmoils and overcome them, or learn to live with them in a new way. That's what heroes do.
Mm-hmm. Getting back to determining type of combat encounters, let's take it a step further. How do you determine the difficulty of the combat encounter? Is it strictly by character level? Is there some sort of guide or formula to follow?
Yeah, so...
It's a big one, isn't it?
Yeah, this is another question that gets tossed around on Reddit all the time. The DMG, the Dungeon Master's Guide, offers guidelines to this effect on pages 81 through 87. There, it talks about how to think of combat in terms of what is called an XP threshold. The basic idea is that a group of characters, or each character even, has an XP threshold for the day, which is how much XP worth of monsters they can fight in a single day based on their character level.
Okay, yeah.
Out of that, there are 4 different categories that they generally fall into: easy, medium, hard, or deadly combat encounters. And these combat counters are determined based on the XP value of the monsters. These XP values are determined by the CR, or challenge rating, that each monster is assigned in the game.
Okay.
We're getting a little number crunchy and a little technical right now, so please bear with us. For example, a CR3 creature is worth 700 XP.
Gotcha.
How easy or difficult it will be to face that creature is determined by your XP threshold.
Okay.
And there are modifiers that can change the value of a monster's XP based on the number of characters and the number of monsters. It's pretty complex, but it is helpful to read it and kind of wrap your head around it. There is also an encounter builder that you can use for free on D&D Beyond.
Very cool.
That can help you with the click of a mouse. If you go on there and you set up, okay, I have 4 level 5 characters, how many goblins are going to be an easy threat to them?
Okay.
You can look at it and you get to see how the adjustments happen with a little bar graph that fills with XP based on how many monsters you add to the combat. So that's really, really helpful. Eventually you get a feel for how to build encounters based on your players, their characters, and the game that you all like to play. Just to kind of throw an example out there, what is a deadly encounter for a group of 4 level 2 characters would be incredibly easy for a group of 5 level 6 characters.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay.
As for CR itself, it's kind of hotly debated by the fan base as to whether or not it really means anything. Most GMs that I have spoken with seem to feel it's pretty useless, but I like to think it's a good guideline that lets you know kind of roughly how difficult a monster is for your group.
Yeah.
The cool thing about 5e is you can adjust a monster up or down in any capacity. If you want to make a stronger Mind Flayer, you can do it. You just give them another attack, or you give them more HP or a higher AC. Or maybe you let them cast a couple of spells per day. It's all about tinkering. And this stuff all starts to come easier once you do it or you take a look at it. And there's lots of resources about DM toolboxing, both in the Dungeon Master's Guide and available online in Reddit and forum communities, Discord communities all over the internet. Like, you can find people to help you with this.
That's good to know. It also sounds like perhaps there's a little trial and error, that tinkering is probably not a bad way to go. You know, maybe you're building encounters that your players are just blowing through, so, figure out how to beef them up a little bit. Hopefully you don't do the opposite, where you create a TPK situation.
I admit I have done both in my time.
I'm sure it happens,
I mean, I will admit that when I first started DMing in 5th edition, I was not sure, so I did everything with the monsters as they are in the stat blocks. And in a monster stat block, you'll see that they may have 5d8s for hit dice, which means if they rolled all 8s, they would have 40 HP.
Right.
But generally those monsters tend to have around like 25 HP because they take the average dice rolls plus their constitution bonus.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay. That's a big difference.
Yeah, so in a stat block, it would be like, okay, they have 25 hit points out of a possible maximum of 40. Now, with that information, I found that going just by CR and using the monsters as is was way too easy for my characters, or for my players, to overcome. They were wiping the floor, the monsters weren't getting to do anything, they were taking them out in 1 or 2 rounds. Which, for an easy combat, that's totally okay, but if they're supposed to be a little more challenging, then you're not really getting the bang for your buck.
Yeah, gets a little boring for the characters, for the players.
Yeah, if they're not really challenged by it, then what's the point? Nobody plays video games on easy mode, right?
Well, no, I'm just kidding.
Well, okay. Some people do. And no shame to those people, Matt. But Anyway, so I tend to give them the maximum HP in my home game with 6 people playing, because then the monsters stick around and the characters get to feel like they're using their abilities.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so this is probably another hotly debated topic, but what is your opinion? How long do you think combat should be?
Okay, yeah. So D&D 5th edition claims that each easy encounter should be between 3 and 5 rounds. It tells you that in the Dungeon Master's Guide.
Okay.
They say that like an epic battle should be between 10 and 20 rounds.
Oh.
But if you really want the monsters to shine, give them more HP or do what I do and ride their HP on the fly.
Okay.
Sometimes the narrative may be underserved if the BBEG, the big bad evil guy, goes down in round 2, but the minions take 6 rounds to just mop up.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that is a really underwhelming sense of achievement, right? If you're like, well, we killed that guy in 12 seconds, but we got to take another 2 minutes cleaning up all these mooks that he's got working for him.
Right.
So this is where riding the HP button can be really useful. And I think it's only worth doing with BBEGs, with like the big bad adversaries. And you shouldn't give them like infinite hit points. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, you give them, okay, they're going to have 400 hit points. And it could be that the characters do way more damage to that within the first 3 rounds. And like it's underserved if the characters have destroyed them already. So just ride the HP button, give the narrative effect a real drama to it.
Yeah.
Because the players don't know what their stats are.
Right. And it's not really cheapening anything, I don't think, for them, because it's giving them, like you said, it's a more dramatic and more like satisfying battle.
Yeah, it's letting them use their character abilities.
Right. You already found out as the DM, at that point that they're going to defeat this guy.
Right, exactly. So the real answer is, ideally combat shouldn't feel like it's dragging on.
Mm-hmm.
But the trick is, the longer it goes on, the more invested you need to feel. Like, you need to feel the tension and the edge as your character's hit points drop. And as your abilities wane, but the bad guy's still going strong, or he's summoning more allies, or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, you need that tension to build. You need that adrenaline to pump. And then when you think you can't take it anymore, okay, you got him. Or now they escape, or whatever you're going to do.
Right. I imagine there's some give and take in that too, right? Depending on a session. If you had 2 or 3 very, very long combat encounters, maybe that's a lot for a night. It's probably worth noting that, like, combat fatigue will really set in. I don't mean necessarily for the characters, I mean for the players. If they're having, like, 2 20-round fights back-to-back, that may be a lot.
Oh, yeah, totally.
So, I'm curious, do you build encounters and situations that may or may not happen? I think I know the answer to this, but I'm curious to hear how you normally plan.
Yeah, all the time.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, all the time. Because here's the thing, if you have an idea, the players may not go that route. So you're just like, okay, throw that to the side. But you don't have to throw it away.
Oh, okay.
You can always bring it back or work it in later. If it's a small little, like, oh, this would be cool encounter, like, it can happen later, some other day, some other place.
Sure. Yeah.
If it is, like, specific to a locale that the characters decide not to engage in, well, then that just means the plans of that entity are going to go through without any interference.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if they don't investigate the merchant who's rumored to be selling, strange, mysterious wares, and they leave town and go off and do other things, they could come back, and now that merchant is on the town council and has used their money to bribe and blackmail their way to power. So now they're more of a threat.
Ah, yeah. That's a good point. A situation that I have now fond memories of, it's one of those, we like to tell the story, is in Newly, I know this happened at least once, that we were tromping through a desert, and one of the characters saw something in the distance. It looked interesting, but it looked like a plant, and they wanted to get a closer look, and then we realized very quickly it was in fact a creature, and we had a sort of like impromptu battle that went on for quite some time. I think it was, might have been like a 10-round fight. And later, Jarrod told us that was just something you had added, right? As like,
right.
To kind of flesh out the terrain, but we may have completely avoided it if we just, kept walking.
Yeah, it was one of those things where I had this cool idea, and I just had it in the back of my mind like, hey, it's possible they could run into one of these things. And all of a sudden, an encounter was happening that was pretty dangerous for you all, actually.
It was, yeah. It could have, that curiosity could have killed the cat, so to speak. But those are fun. Yeah, I like the idea that there's possible lots of like little things like that sprinkled about. Now that probably means as a DM that you may have some disappointment where you've thought of a really cool creature or situation and the party does in fact miss it. But like you said, it's good to realize that you can kind of keep that.
Yeah, you can always keep something in your back pocket and bring it out later at any point in time.
Yeah, exactly. So, a fun little segment we like to do here on Mid-Level Adventurers is the Tavern Corner, where we go to the tavern and we discuss what we are imbibing tonight. So, Jarrod, start us off. What are you imbibing this evening?
Well, Matt, I'm glad you asked. Here in the Tavern Corner tonight, I am drinking Single Cut Brewery's Kim, which is their hibiscus and blackcurrant sour lager.
Oh, wow. A sour lager. Now, that is unique.
It is. I have never had a sour lager before. I've had goses and other stuff that are supposed to be sour ales.
Right.
But I've never had a sour lager before. And this is actually really, really good.
Oh.
Single Cut is bottled here in Astoria, New York.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And in Clifton Park, New York, I think. Sorry, Clifton Park, New York.
Clifton Park, okay.
It's got a cool mouth pull on the front, like a sour candy would, like a Sour Patch Kid kind of deal.
Oh, sure.
And I think that is from the currant.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the currant kind of pulls you in, but then it's got this nice, sweet, kind of relaxing overflow from the hibiscus. I actually really, really like it. It's kind of a red or pink lager, which is weird, very enjoyable, and very tasty. This Single Cut, I would highly recommend. I think the last one I had, I wasn't too big on.
Right.
I think it's really tasty, and if you can get it, I would recommend the Single Cut Beersmith's Kim.
Okay. Well, next time I'm back in New York, I'm going to have to look for Single Cut.
It is a little pricey. It was about $16 for a 4-pack.
But they are the pint-sized cans?
They are, yes.
Okay.
So really, if you look at like $4 for a pint, it's not really a bad deal.
No.
Like this would probably be an $8 or $9 beer at a bar.
Oh, yeah.
So you still come out ahead of the game. But so that's what I am drinking today. What are you imbibing?
Well, tonight I'm doing something a little different.
Mm-hmm.
I had it's a little cold here in Georgia, which I know it's not that cold compared to a lot of places. But I wanted a little coffee. So I actually am imbibing some coffee tonight. It's not just any coffee, though, mind you. I was able to take a trip over the holidays to Colombia, where my fiance's family lives, and bring back some coffee, which is one of my favorite things to do. So this is a very, 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 very small batch, I guess, if you will. It comes from a local farm that grows and roasts the coffee themselves.
Oh.
And it is Café de los Montes. The name kind of has a double meaning because Montes is sort of like another name for mountain,
Sure.
or for certain mountains, like a range of mountains. And the family's last name is Montes, so a little clever. It's good coffee. It's something kind of unique and special that you don't get even with coffee that you buy in the U.S. that is from South America or from Colombia. It's a little stronger, and this is actually a soft roast. That's what they call it. Suave, and I find that it's just a little, for a light, what we would consider a light roast, is bolder flavors, and I prefer drinking it black myself to really like get the kind of all the nuances of the coffee. So you've got like hints of dark chocolate, maybe like a little dark fruit to it as well.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just like one of those that I kind of find myself sometimes in the afternoon even like wanting.
Would you call it a light roast then, or would you call it a medium roast?
I think by most standards in the U.S., some people might consider this a medium roast, or it might feel like a medium roast to them.
Okay.
And the roasters kind of set their own scale sometimes. But according to what they roast at this place, this is actually a light roast.
Okay.
I tend to like medium to dark roast myself usually. I like that really bold, full flavor. I like things that taste kind of like dark chocolate and kind of has like a coffee taste like you imagine, like when things are coffee flavored,
I get a shudder just thinking about it.
See, I like that. I like coffee, like flavored stouts and things like that. So, or stouts that have been brewed with coffee.
Sure, yeah.
Which is what I almost picked up, and I ended, I thought, you know what, I'll just get some coffee. It's weird, maybe, but yeah.
But this is coffee from your fiance's family's hometown. That is grown and
Right.
made there.
Right, yeah, they're actually the people that grow and roast this are friends of her family. So it's a very very tiny little coffee farm here.
Is it just like local in town? You can't get it at CVS.
Yeah, it's pretty much local in town. There may be a few stores that they partner with, but I think for the most part, if you want it, you have to just contact them and schedule either like to have it shipped to you or some kind of.
Cool. So this would be like a really like boutique rare coffee for most people then.
Yeah, I think so.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's neat. I'm not a huge coffee snob. I don't know how it ranks with like those that have tried some of the quote best coffees in the world, but
Yeah, but the story is cool and the connection is there.
yeah, and I like I like doing small local things anyway, like giving business to people like that. So it's about as small and local as you can get on a coffee scale.
Very cool.
I'll have to get more when I go back. Cheers.
Cheers. Click.
So that's what we are imbibing tonight. Couple little, maybe for fun questions here at the end. What sort of monsters or foes do you like to throw at the characters? Do you have any favorites?
Oh yeah, totally. I love using weird, strange creatures. I mean, I love kobolds. They're my favorite overall. Kobolds are so cool, but after level 4, they don't really present a significant threat on their own.
Fair.
But beholders and dragons are always deadly and fun. I mean, there's nothing like a crazy beholder with their anti-magic cone eye, or a dragon with its incredible breath and just physical presence that can be terrifying all on its own.
And they're both intelligent. That's probably important to note, too.
Yeah, but if you really, really, really want to twist a PC's mind, a humanoid usually serves best.
Ah, yeah.
Yeah, someone who they know or someone they trusted, a love interest or someone who's been secretly watching them and keeping an eye on them and now knows all their weaknesses. These adversaries, I find, are much more effective at really getting into the PC's psyche and really transforming the character in a new, interesting way. For example, one of my characters in my home game is a Kenku, and part of her backstory is that she was part of a previous adventuring group.
Okay.
She was the sole survivor of a mission they went on where they attacked a troll. Troll killed everybody else, or so she thought. Turns out the fighter actually survived. He was knocked unconscious by the troll, but managed to pull himself back from death just in time to see the troll devour the gnome and the half-elf, and he managed to get up and get away. But he did see the Kenku cut and run.
Ah.
Ultimately, she ended up finding him again in a tavern in another city. And she was overjoyed to see her friend, and her friend was overjoyed to see her. They happened to be tracking a serial killer at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was like, why are you in this town? Like, it's dangerous for Kenkus here. You should leave. No, we're going to track this killer down. Well, then I got to go with you to keep you safe. And she was like, yeah, of course, totally. So he joined her, and turns out he was the killer. He set up an ambush for her and attempt to kill her because he was driven insane by the fact that he saw his friend so devoured and totally blamed her for running away instead of helping to fight. He felt that if she had stayed and fought the troll, their other friends would have survived. So he totally blamed her. He kind of developed a warlock pact with a vengeance demon and all kinds of crazy cool stuff. Did ultimately defeat him, but ever since that point in time, there has been a significant shift in her character. Prior to that, her most commonly used speech pattern, because Kenkus have no voice of their own, they can only mimic speech that they've heard before.
Mm-hmm.
Her most common one was this kind of Canadian, oh, hey, no problem, buddy. We can totally do it, eh? Which was that guy's voice.
Ah.
But ever since shit went down, she has not used that voice because she can't. Whether it's guilt or sadness or anger, she just can't use that voice anymore. And that's a big character shift.
That's deep. And it's a pretty impactful foe, more so than Band of Goblins, for instance.
Yeah, and even a beholder, like, hey, we beat a beholder. Well done. Woo, good job.
Right.
But, like, I had to fight and kill my friend who I thought was already dead because he was going to kill me. That stays with you longer than, hey, we killed a monster in a cave.
Right. No, definitely. Well, here's the last one. How do you react to the party handling an encounter in a completely different or unexpected way? Do you tend to, like, reward them for their creativity?
Oh, yeah, totally.
Throw your hands up in disgust?
I mean, I do that too, yeah. No, I love it when they come up with a way to do something that I was not expecting. Some DMs give out inspiration, but I always kind of forget to do that. So I reward them with a cool treasure or an item, or maybe they get an ally that can help them in some way. It all depends. Maybe they get a little bit of XP or whatever. There is this idea in all tabletop games called the rule of cool.
Mm-hmm.
If someone comes up with a fun idea, yeah, it may ruin the monster's plans, but the player outsmarted the system, so good job. If they can use their abilities in a way that you didn't think about, then there's no reason to deny them that. I do think it needs to be reasonable. For example, a level 6 rogue can use a bonus action to hide, and by using that bonus action to hide, they could gain advantage on their next attack, and therefore use sneak attack damage if they hit. But there has to be a way for that rogue to hide. You can't just hide behind another creature, and if you just duck behind a barrel that's out in the middle of the room, like, oh, look, there's a barrel right there, or there's a pillar, they're probably going to be able to track that. So,
Right.
Yeah, you're hiding, but they know that you're hiding there. Like, they can't see you, but they know where you are.
Right.
So it needs to make sense. You would get cover from hiding behind that pillar, totally. Hiding out in the middle of an open room, probably not going to work very well for you. However, if that same rogue wants to push over a pile of barrels and see if they can flatten their enemies, totally going to allow for that. Creative use of spells, abilities, or environment makes for fun, memorable combat, and that's what becomes the epic stories that we tell each other or that we like to relive, and that makes the legend of the characters grow.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm always going to let somebody try to, cut the cord and swing on the rope of the chandelier and send it crashing down. You just got to let that cool factor in, because otherwise it's like you're denying the players a chance to do something that they want to do.
Yeah.
They can want to do all kinds of things. Doesn't mean they're going to succeed. It could be very easy for them to do. It could be very hard for them to do. It could have an awesome effect, or it could not actually be that impactful. It all depends. That's what the dice are for. Once
True.
the dice get involved, it's all about random chance.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
It's not the DM making the call. It's not the players making the call. It's the universe.
I think that's an important note to bring up, and we haven't really touched on that in this episode yet. I'm sure we have in the past. But yeah, the dice determine what happens. I mean, you can have a combat situation that your party should be fully prepared for, and they roll terribly, and the enemy rolls very well, and suddenly you maybe have an upset.
Mm-hmm.
Or vice versa. Maybe they totally steamroll a boss you thought was actually going to be tough because they had more criticals than is naturally possible, and the monster rolled all once.
In the words of Sun Tzu, no battle plan survives its first encounter with the enemy. As soon as other people get involved, all your plans are out the window, because you can only think how you think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You can't think how someone else might interpret that visual data.
Very true.
And they might ask a question you hadn't thought about, like, hey, what's the ground like? It's a stone floor. But like cobblestones or tiles? Oh, tiles. Cool. If I throw oil on that tile, will it slick and maybe they can fall prone? Sure. Give it a shot.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's important to reward that because those type of things may not happen all the time. And I think as a player, you shouldn't feel pressured to always have the one idea that's going to like cut the battle time in half because you did this really cool thing and you dropped a pile of rocks into the monster or something. You know, those situations may not always happen, but I do think it's fun, and I encourage you to look for those situations, and therefore as a DM to be flexible and roll with those new ideas. And like Jarrod said, they may not always work.
Right.
But yeah, that's a very good point. This has been great. This has been a fun little exercise to swap hats, if you will.
Yeah, I always like it when we do this reverse format, so to speak. So, in conclusion, building combat encounters can be tricky when you first start out as a DM. And what works for me may not work for you, may not work for anybody else. But I would say that if you are a DM just starting out, use the guidelines in the DMG, pages 81 through 87, and use it in conjunction with the Combat Encounter Builder on D&D Beyond. Using those two items together will allow you to see in real time what it looks like when player characters and monsters interact for a combat encounter. But experiment, see what happens, adjust as you need to. Building combat encounters does become a fun and challenging exercise as a DM, and it's extremely rewarding. It creates something that your friends are going to overcome and experience for all the table. I mean, my friends still talk about the times that they defeated dinosaurs, or the times that they died from a beholder. Good or bad, memorable combats happen, and you shouldn't be afraid to experiment when building them.
Yeah, that's a good point. I know we mentioned this earlier, but I want to bring up again. It's important to remember that if you do have questions, or maybe more specific scenarios that you're trying to work out, there are lots of online resources, forums, etc. And very oftentimes you can get responses from people and get multiple opinions, and then kind of form your own conclusion, how you want to proceed, and then try it and tinker, make it better the next time.
Exactly. Well, we would like to thank you all for joining us on our first adventure back after our prolonged break. We have a lot planned, starting next time with an episode about role-playing and some of our favorite tips and tricks and a little bit of an in-depth look into how to get comfortable role-playing.
Mm-hmm.
So come back for that, and remember to check out our friend and the composer of all the music used on Mid-Level Adventurers, John D. Ivy, on SoundCloud.com. Make sure to follow us on Facebook at Mid-Level Adventurers, and on Twitter and Instagram at MidLVLAdventure.
And please check out our website on Wix at midleveladventurer.wixsite.com, and feel free to email us at midleveladventurers@gmail.com. And watch Jarrod and I on Newly Forged Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern at twitch.tv/newlyforged. You can catch up on previous episodes on our Newly Forged YouTube channel, so come on by and like, comment, and subscribe. That's NUULIFORGED.
And as always, I'm Jarrod Jehoda.
And I'm Matt Morris.
Until then, mind the traps and keep adventuring.